Welcome back into Iggy Sports Talk. I'm your host, Jake Nizuski, or Iggy for short. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And today, I had the opportunity to talk with co-host of Foul Territory, Scott Braun, about the winners and losers of this year's MLB offseason. And him and I also speak about how to fix MLB free agency. Without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Scott. Really appreciate you taking the time today, Scott. And I just wanted to say for the people who are listening, if you haven't checked out Foul Territory yet, it's really been incredible to see what you guys have been building. In my eyes, is kind of like the Pat McAfee of baseball, and really being able to give inside scoops from former players and current players, and really have that digital focus type news outlet.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Jake, and great to see you, and great job on what you're doing as well. And thanks for the love on FT. Yeah, I think that's the approach. I mean, Pat has done an exceptional job of providing another show outlet for fans, right? Like for me on the football side, watching NFL Live in the afternoon for years, and then you see what Pat does covering the news on a daily basis and bringing on big guests and being unfiltered and having less rules with commercials and all of that. So, yeah, we went for a similar approach. There are many other new media platforms that are out there in basketball and football that were also inspirations for us and that we could take a little page out of their playbook for. And honestly, it's a dream. I mean, it's been the way that I envision a modern baseball network should look like. And that's why we use the line baseball the way it should be covered. I feel like it's kind of flowing that way with the news, the insiders like Ken Rosenthal being a big part of this group, and then all of the player perspective that has no BS to it. I mean, they're going to go over exactly what is being said in the clubhouse. And then, I'll provide the perspective from the fan side, from maybe a little more of a front office analytical side. So as you know, I'm loving what I'm doing. We're live every day with the show and interacting with fans a lot. So this was really the dream baseball media scenario for me for my entire life, and I'm glad that I'm finally at this point.
Yeah, I've been loving watching it grow and just seeing the guys that you've been able to have on, and also sort of like the news stories that have come out of it. So, props to you and the entire crew. But one of the things that you guys have talked a lot about throughout this offseason, and Ken has brought it up too, is how do you fix free agency? Obviously Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery are still out there. Obviously Cody Bellinger and Matt Chapman just signed, but do you think that there needs to be something done in the next CBA to sort of not allow this free agency process to elongate as long as it has?
I don't think it has to be done, because I think many years it's okay. And then some years when it's bad, it's really bad, like this, where it just spills too deep into spring training. It is bad for business because most moves are not going to get covered the same way in spring training. Once that happens, it just feels like you turn a page. Obviously, it's big for that particular fan base, but we have all winter long to go over those signings. And eventually, I think people get fatigued from the same storylines over and over. And you want to capitalize if you can, in late November, in early December, and sure, spilling into January to an extent, I think is okay. I think the teams are very interested in fixing this because from a marketing standpoint, Jake, they can't sell people on what's coming up next, right? If a guy ends up signing right now on March 25th, and he's going to start the season a little bit late, you don't have him up on posters. You can't call your season ticket holders that way. Players don't have to worry about that. That's not their problem. They're going to say, hey, listen, you should have called me earlier. We should have gotten this done that way. Obviously, Scott Boras sometimes will strike super early in the free agent process. I mean, the year that I think it was Cole and Strasburg and Rendon and all those guys was all at the winter meetings. And then you have a year like this where he's just not getting the prices that he thinks he should be getting. It also isn't just his clients. There's still a number of veteran players that are hanging on the sidelines that you're like, why isn't this player signed? So It plays to both sides. To answer your question, I think what could be done is incentivizing teams earlier on in the free agent process to make signings and giving them something like a compensation pick. An actual deadline is so unrealistic and will never be approved. I don't think my idea will ever be approved either, but I think there's at least a better chance of that being accomplished, where it's like, hey, if you sign a player to an X type of contract by this date, we'll give you a comp pick for basically getting the job done a little bit earlier because that's good for the game. Unfortunately, I generally don't think that the game works or operates that way, and they just won't think that that's going to be helpful for them. I think some teams will be like, well, that's going to hurt us. We're going to want to spend more earlier on. So this just plays to the battle that you have between both sides, between the players and the league and the teams. They just don't see eye to eye on most things, and it often hurts our sport.
I agree, and I think it comes down to like what leverage are you giving to each side, the owners or the players, and I think that's kind of like what you brought up, and also Ken brought up with that deadline, is you would be giving that leverage to the owners. But I agree. I think something needs to change. You go back to the Machado and the Harper year. I mean, they signed at the end of February, but you got to have that excitement a little bit. I think back to 2022, right before the lockout. Baseball was in the news everywhere because there was these huge contracts being signed, and then obviously the lockout happened. Month and a half of bad publicity for the league. But I think being able to add more of that excitement prior to the season, can be helped with a more exciting type of free agency throughout the entire offseason. But, as we're getting closer to the season, wrapping up of this, MLB offseason, I kind of wanted to look at some of the most improved teams going into the season. And, most people would say the Los Angeles Dodgers for good reason with, Yamamoto, Glasnow, Ohtani, and all the other moves that they made. But outside of the Dodgers, I'm curious from your eyes, who do you think is the most improved team going into this season?
I would say potentially the Diamondbacks for some of the moves that they made. I mean, they needed more power at the third base position, and I think they filled that with Eugenio Suarez, who I think is going to have a better year than he did last year. I mean, he got to a strikeout level that was among the league's worst, and I do see him making some adjustments to his game to kind of cut that down a little bit without sacrificing too much power. Maybe just a change of scenery too, and a different perspective helps in that range. Eduardo Rodriguez fills out the rotation a little bit better for them. The Jock Peterson addition certainly helps them as well to add some pop. They needed thump, right? That was missing from the team, and probably another starter. And they were able to accomplish those two things. They bring back Lourdes Gurriel. That sure helps. So for me, I would put them pretty high up on the list. And I mean, it's going to be tough for them to compete in the NL West. NL West teams come to mind for me, actually, because down the line, I'll say San Francisco's done some nice things as well. I'd like to see one more piece. I still think they're a starter short of being a playoff team. So there are still dudes available that we just kind of covered. But for me, I like the Lee addition in center field. They probably overpaid for him, but if he becomes a contact king and he holds down center field nicely, then who cares? They're so far under any luxury tax numbers or anything else anyway. I like the Robbie Ray addition a lot. I think that he's going to come back in whatever it is, July or August, and could be a number 2 starter for them right behind Logan Webb. So that's huge for me. And I know Cobb's going to come back at some point kind of earlier on in the season in the first half. So I like some of the moves that they made that stand out. And of course, the Matt Chapman addition that we just saw from them is going to put them in another level on the defensive side. He's a top 3 defensive third baseman in the game. It's a starting staff that's full of ground ball pitchers. That's an easy dub. It's also just going to give them more confidence. The pitchers are going to attack a little bit differently when they really want the ball to go to the left side like that, right? So even someone like Logan Webb was talking about it right off the jump. They're all kind of laughing that their ERAs just got shaved by like a half a point. So yeah, San Francisco stands out too. Those are a couple teams that I don't want to overlook. And then I'll give you one more on the American League side. There's critiques about them still not going for the jugular and going nuts, but the Yankees did add Juan Soto this offseason. The Soto Judge combo, when they're both healthy, is going to be the best 2-3 combo in baseball. And by 2-3, I mean 2 and 3 in the lineup. So, but the best 1-2 punch. So I think that's automatically a massive improvement. You're getting a guy on a contract year, motivated as hell to get a $500 million contract. So I think the Yankees are a playoff team again. I just don't know if they're a World Series contender with that starting staff right now. It still feels a little bit like Cole and then question marks.
Yeah, I completely agree. All 3 of those teams kind of came to mind when I was looking at this, and even the Yankees too. I mean, if they're able to add one more starter, I really think that they are at that World Series caliber level. But a team that came to mind just based off of like what they were able to do, compared to last season is the Kansas City Royals, obviously adding, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, really filling out that bullpen with Will Smith, Nick Anderson, John Schreiber, Chris Stratton. And then, I think too, it doesn't actually add to the roster, but I think extending Bobby Witt Jr. for a small market team like that is a huge win. And if they're able to win 75 games compared to the 56 this past season, I mean, I think that's a big win.
Yeah, that's another great one. And I agree. I mean, their pitching staff was brutal last year. They've had a lot of trouble developing pitching lately in general. And I watched enough Royals games to be like, dude, I mean, we got to get more strike throwers here. They were well aware of that. And if you look at the pitchers that they acquired, most of those guys are above average command pitchers. Some of them are not like the most elite stuff in the biz, but they just needed to get some guys that know how to throw strikes and aren't extending games. That was a huge issue for them. So yeah, I agree. And you'll see some improvements hopefully from some of the young guys too. Does MJ Melendez continue the hot second half and turn that into a full season of success? So yeah, I like the Royals to be much more of a pain. I don't know if they're a playoff team, but they're much more of a pain this year than they were last year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, obviously with what we saw, throughout this offseason, kind of slow, obviously, with the free agency as well. But there wasn't a ton of teams that really did a ton of stuff outside of maybe, the ones that we just listed. But for you, looking at the most disappointing offseason, obviously the hat that I'm wearing, the Boston Red Sox, probably comes to mind a little bit. But what's a team that stuck out for you?
Yeah, they're number one. That's easy. I mean, you're never going to get over the full throttle comments until they actually go full throttle. It doesn't matter. Oh, misspoke, whatever. It doesn't matter. Even if those comments weren't made, people are pissed because they expected the team to do some damage here. Oh, Chaim Bloom's not aggressive enough. Okay, well, now you bring in Craig Breslow and you're basically handcuffing him and you can't really do much. It sounds like there's just a ton of miscommunication going on right now within the front office and ownership and how much they are allowed to spend and where they're allowed to kind of improve the team. So it's just been very, very strange. The Lucas Giolito injury sucks. Who knows? He might not be with the team for the entire year. Usually when you see an injury like that pop up, it's not good news afterward. And even to add insult to injury, I actually think Chris Sale is going to have a really good year. I know it's been tough for him to stay on the field, but man, he's looking really freaking good in spring training right now. So for Boston, they have such a severe lack of pitching compared to any other playoff contenders that it's going to be a tough year for them. And they could have done significant damage. I mean, they're not touching any of those severe penalties, right? They're spending less than usual. They're acting like you don't need to spend to win. But every time that they've won, they've spent top 5 in the league. So the answer is yes. If you're Boston, you're able to do that. You're a big market ball club. You've done some nice things with developing position players. You've got your superstar endeavors. This is the time to add 2 or 3 pitchers. And they just didn't do that. They added 1, they subtracted 1. So they're going to get bit for it. I mean, they're going to be a last place team in the AL East. There's no way around that unless they suddenly surprise me tomorrow morning and sign Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery. I think even, Jake, if they sign one of them, they're probably still in the cellar in the division.
Yeah, I think too, we heard Rafael Devers just last week sort of say that very similar thing as they know what we need. Everybody knows what we need. And I think especially with that full throttle comment, I was at Winter Weekend. I heard the boos, you know what I mean? The fans feel it. And I agree. I think it's going to be a 3rd last place season in a row, but it just all comes down to ownership, not willing to spend and penny pinching, trying to penny pinch for a Jordan Montgomery or any of these other guys. But the team that came to my mind is the Toronto Blue Jays. I think that this was kind of their year to try and go all in with, Vladdy and Bo, free agents after the 25 season, lost Matt Chapman, only signed Justin Turner and Uriel Rodriguez. Both of those guys, Turner obviously played well for the Red Sox last year, going into his 39th, 40th season. Rodriguez barely even pitched this past season. I think the bright side is that the rotation is relatively very good. Alek Manoah could have a big season, bounce back, but I would have thought that they would have done a little bit more to try and compete in the AL East.
Yeah, and if you look at last year, Manoah obviously had a disaster year. He'd be the first person to tell you that. The rest of the rotation was healthy and consistent. Generally, year to year, you're just not going to get that, even though the names on paper look really good. You already have a little bit of a shoulder question mark with Gossman that we're hearing in camp. I saw that a little bit with even Manoah. So, and Ricky Tiedemann has, I don't remember what the malady is, but some type of injury issue as well. So it starts to hit the depth. I think the front office was looking at their team and saying, this team has not performed up to what our projections say. and that's why they were a little bit timid. Shohei Ohtani was in a different category. They had an Ohtani budget and a regular budget, but I agree with you. On paper, they probably got a little bit worse. They're expecting Manoah to bounce back and for that rotation to still be a significant strength. Okay. And their bullpen's good. Okay. And technically, there's guys in the lineup that you would think are going to do better. I wouldn't discount how much it's going to hurt losing someone like Chapman at the third base position and the defense that he brought. I know the bat was inconsistent and it sounded like there was a little bit of an issue. I don't remember. It was maybe a ring finger, one of those issues that seemed like maybe it was holding him back from the pull power. That's why he only put 17 homers together. But they're like, are we going to get MVP candidate Vladdy back? I think that probably dictates a lot of what their offense looks like because it was mediocre last year. I know, Whit Merrifield was, more of an average ball player, but he was an all-star player for them. Played pretty consistently well, maybe dipped off a little bit towards the end of the season, but you replace him with IKF, Isaiah Falefa, who's more of a glove guy. So you're right. I mean, I wouldn't crush their offseason, but they certainly, didn't go all out. It's not as sexy of a World Series pick as they were the last couple of years. The one other team I'll add that you mentioned briefly was the Cubs. The Cubs haven't gotten much better on paper. Right? They've got a really good farm system. Still, a lot of those guys are a bit away from coming up and being contributors. Marcus Stroman was a stud for them in the first half of last season before kind of falling apart and having the injury in the second half. He's gone. Bellinger's back, sure, but you had him last year. What were the significant additions on offense? Michael Busch, we'll see. Dodgers giving up on a player makes me nervous in general, so I'm not sure what they're going to get with him. And then on the pitching side, Imanaga is one of the most highly debated players in baseball this year. You have some people that think he's going to be like a 2 or 3, and then you have others that think he might not even last in their rotation. That is a crazy variance. So when you add it all up and the Hector Neris addition to the bullpen, they're not that much better on paper. They think that they're going to get multiple wins out of Craig Counsell, okay, but to me, it doesn't look like a World Series contender either, and they also could have struck, and maybe they still do, but I'm not in love with what they did this offseason. I would say they're up there on the disappointment list.
Yeah, I agree. And, they spent all that money last season and we saw how it worked out. And so they're not going to, get too much better. I don't think the result's going to get too much better. And, the last thing I wanted to say on the Blue Jays, something that I hadn't thought about was, with the playoffs last season, we saw sort of the immaturity of the team, all the young guys, kind of making those mental mistakes. And the one thing that I think Justin Turner brings that he brought to the Red Sox last year is that leadership in the clubhouse, even though he's on a 1-year contract. Like, he became a huge fan favorite in Boston, really helped out a lot of the young guys. So I think if the Blue Jays do ultimately make it to the playoffs and are able to look a little bit more mature, maybe because of that veteran presence, I think that might be something that, Turner could bring rather than, what's only on the field.
Yeah, that's fair. I think Justin helped the Red Sox overachieve last year. I mean, you look at the team and it's a last place finish. I think they might have been even worse than what they put together. The offense certainly performed at a pretty decent standard for them last year. Nobody expected the pitching to do anything, and they didn't do anything. But yeah, the Turner addition is nice. Brandon Belt was really good for the Blue Jays last year. And as of right now, I mean, he doesn't have a job, or maybe he's retiring. I don't know. So I think a lot of it is like addition, subtraction, kind of evens out for me in terms of what you'll see on paper. But yeah, maybe Turner helps them from a focus standpoint and just bringing someone else into the clubhouse to be a leader for them. So yeah, I could see that. I still think the Blue Jays are a playoff team. They're just, they're not as highly talked about, I would say, as they were the last couple of years. Cause I think people are like, I'm not going to get fooled by this team again. I like too many things on paper, but I'm not going to get fooled. And that's fair. Even Ryu came back and was pretty good for them in the starts that he put together. So there are more losses than adds for them, really, when you do all the math.
Yeah, I agree. And, we've been mainly focusing on what teams have done throughout the offseason. And I'm now wanting to look at sort of a team kind of like we saw from the Orioles this past year, who took a huge leap. And, thinking about, what teams could make that big leap this season with some of the young guys they have, or, even some of the guys that they got throughout this offseason. Is there any teams that in your mind you could really see make that Orioles type of big leap?
Yeah, the Cincinnati Reds, they're my pick right now to win the division. I think there's depth. I think there is a starting rotation that's young and should bounce back a bit. I mean, Nick Lodolo was barely a factor for them last year. You would think he will be this year. I could see Hunter Green taking another step. I mean, he's working tirelessly to figure out how to fill out the rest of his arsenal. He's got 2 pitches down pat. I think the Nick Martinez addition was huge for them. There were quite a few additions this offseason. Emilio Pagan to add to the bullpen. That stood out to me. Even Jamer Candelario, who's not my favorite signing, gives them a lot more depth. I mean, he can play first and third, kind of covers if you either have an injury or a sophomore slump or two. But that's the main reason I like this team is how many rookies came up last year for them and showed either consistency from the jump like a Matt McLean or flashes of potential like an Ellie De La Cruz or a Christian Encarnacion Strand. So I just think there's too much talent there for them to struggle, and I could see them taking another step and being a playoff team. They were pretty close last year. I think they finished like a couple games out. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline. Apparently they tried. We spoke to Nick Raw, their GM, on Foul Territory, and he made it like the offers always included players from his major league club that were going to make them worse. And that's fair. I wouldn't make that deal either. I'm like, if you want to make a trade, we trade prospects. I've got a playoff contender. I'm not trading players off of that team. So hopefully they're able to do that this year if they have a hole to patch up. And I think the Reds are going to win the division.
Yeah, I think they're a really exciting team. Obviously, we saw last year pitching was a little bit of a weakness. And, with the Frankie Montas addition, a potential big bounce back type candidate. Very curious to see how not only that all plays out, but also how their players, like you mentioned, Matt McLean, Spencer Steer, like Ellie De La Cruz, continue to develop, especially from what the dip we saw of Ellie last year. Him in a full season, I think we could see some superstardom. For the team, for me, I thought of like the Detroit Tigers. I think their rotation is really interesting. Obviously the Mize, the Matt Manning, but also with the Jack Flaherty, the Kenta Maeda additions. And I think with some of the younger players, the Spencer Torkelson, Riley Green, they could take a big leap. And then as well, Parker Meadows, Colt Keith. I think with full seasons under their belt, I'm very curious to see sort of how this all plays out. And they could really see sort of what they have in this team going to the future.
Yeah, I like the Tigers too. That was a team we talked about as a chance to sneak into a playoff spot because the AL Central didn't really improve much. I mean, Cleveland's got nice pitching. Their offense is pretty poor. It's very contact oriented with not much of a power threat. Minnesota took a step back in terms of their roster construction this year. They could make a case on their side that there's enough young talent coming through. So maybe you could kind of split the difference there. But on the pitching side, at least for me, I think there's a little less trust for Minnesota. They are still heavy favorites to win the division. But yeah, there's an opening there in the Central. The Tigers will be better. The Royals will be better. Overall, it's still the worst division in baseball. And that's what gives teams opportunities. So if things click the right way for a team like Detroit, then yeah, maybe they sneak towards the top of the division. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting things to look out for this 2024 season, and really, really appreciate you breaking it all down with me today, Scott. And for anybody that wants to check out Foul Territory and support the amazing stuff that you guys are doing over there, where can they find it?
At Foul Territory Show on most social accounts. You can search Foul Territory on wherever you get your pods. Also Fair Territory with Ken Rosenthal. He's on our show, but then hosts his own show as well. And the only difference is on Twitter, since we're characters short, you have to do at Foul Territory TB. That's all we could squeeze in there. But yeah, YouTube is the spot every day live if you want to chat and participate. And then obviously the show's all up there afterward and some of the clips that we'll break out for you on the big storylines. But many ways to reach us, even if you want to send a DM on a certain guest that you want us to talk to on the major league side. We usually try and fulfill all of those as best as possible if you follow us on Instagram. So basically everywhere that you would consume baseball content, if you type in Foul Territory, you will find us. And yeah, Jake, I appreciate that. It's been a fun first year. We just hit our first year anniversary. We launched March 1st of 2023, and here we go with year 2.
That's amazing, man. Keep on killing it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Jake.
I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Scott and got a little bit of a better understanding about who you should be excited about for this upcoming MLB season. And I don't know about you, I had a lot of fun speaking with Scott and also looking at how to fix the MLB free agency. It's been a little bit frustrating as an overall baseball fan, seeing all these players still on the open market with spring training going on in the MLB season almost happening or almost starting in the next few weeks or so. But as the season continues, I'm going to continue to have guests on like Scott speaking about what's happening in the MLB season, as well as some of the other major sports. I know for the most part, I'll focus on the mental health aspects of sports, have on different guests speaking about their journeys, but I also still really enjoy talking about some of the biggest storylines in some of the major sporting leagues. So make sure to subscribe to Iggy Sports Talk over on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts for not only updates about some of the major storylines regarding some of the biggest sporting leagues, like obviously the MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, but also for inspiring stories that you've heard on Iggy Sports Talk in the past, because got a lot of great guests planned and also pre-recorded as well that I'm going to be putting out over these next few weeks or so. But as always, greatly appreciate you tuning into this episode. And if you want to hear more updates regarding the podcast, as well as different clips from these different episodes and also videos that connect mental health and sports as well, make sure to follow Iggy Sports Talk over on Instagram. It's at Iggy Sports Talk. But thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you and talk to you next time. Peace.